joins, then we would have quorum.
Thanks.
Okay, Dave is joining. So we do have quorum whenever you would like to start, Chair Wessel.
Good morning, Rhonda. Good morning, Heather. We have a quorum?
We do.
We do. Well, let's go ahead and get this meeting started. Good morning. I'm David Wessel, Metro Plan Planning Manager. I am chairing the meeting today as Shane Dilley our chair is not available. So welcome everybody. And at this point, I believe we're calling for roll call. Is that right, Rhonda?
Yes.
Call to order. So we're called to order. Let's have roll call. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Right now, I am not hearing anything.
Okay, I am ready to go. Thank you. Coconino County, Tiffany Kerr.
Rhonda, you look to be muted.
Oh,
I can hear her just fine, Dave, so I'm not sure if maybe something's wrong with your audio.
I'm using the training room sound.
I am still not hearing anything. Is that just me?
It's
Dave,
just-
can you hear me?
I can hear everybody.
so
Okay.
yeah, and I can too, yeah.
Can people hear me? This is Tiffany.
James, can you send Dave a message and let him know that we can hear him, but he cannot hear us?
Thank you. Coconino County, Julian Thomas.
Okay. I'm sorry. I got it fixed.
Present.
City of Flagstaff, Jeff Bowman.
I'm here.
Metro Plan, Dave Wessel.
Present.
NAU, Aaron Stom.
Here,
NAU student, Maylee Acosta, excused. Citizen representative for City of Flagstaff is vacant. CCC, Kurt Stahl.
Present.
And Economic Development Representative Gail Jackson. Let me see if that's, Gail is being admitted right now. And Gail, are you with us? I'll come back. We do have Chris Beecher, our Mountain Line attorney, on the line. And we do have a few guests from AECom with us for the Flagstaff in motion item. Tyler Besh. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Are you with us, Tyler?
Yep. Good morning. Thank you.
Morning. Andrew Iddickson.
I'm here. Great, thank you.
Thanks. Daksha Masurka
I'm here.
and Robert Peskin.
And I'm here.
Thank you. And let me just see who else is trying to join. And we have another staff member. Okay, we have members of the staff here in the training room and online. Thank you. Turning it back to you, Chair Wessel.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the safety minute with Sam Short, the safety manager. Sam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Transit Advisory Committee. The first safety minute for February is on seatbelt use. So everyone's heard that seatbelt use is crucial for saving lives on the road, but not everybody wears one. Studies show about 1 in 7 people do not wear their seatbelt. There are many reasons why people do not wear their seatbelt. Here are 3 common reasons. 1, it is not cool. Teenagers are the least likely age group to wear their seatbelts. Educate your teenager and your family on seatbelt use. Male teenagers are 10% less likely to wear their seatbelts compared to females. Number 2, they are uncomfortable. If it is to this point that it is uncomfortable for you to wear a seatbelt, look into buying an aftermarket pad to put on your seatbelt. Do not put it behind your back instead of across your chest. Wearing it improperly will make it less effective in protecting you during a crash. And 3, the myth is that it's more dangerous to wear a seatbelt than not to. Research shows that this is not the case. Search on YouTube, man does not wear seatbelt, to see what it looks like when a person rolls a vehicle and does not have one on. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, seatbelts reduce crash-related injuries and deaths by 50%. Individuals who do not wear their seatbelt are more likely to be ejected from the vehicle in a crash. Seatbelts serve as a restraint for passengers in a vehicle. They restrain an individual to the seat instead of being ejected from the vehicle or being thrown around the interior of the vehicle in the instance of a crash. Please wear your seatbelt. Thank you and welcome to the February Transit Advisory Committee meeting.
Thank you, Sam. Item agenda number 4 is the approval of the TAC minutes of January 6, 2022. Are there any questions or comments regarding the minutes? Hearing none, will take a motion to approve the minutes.
Hi, Dave. It's Erin. I make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Aaron. Motion by Aaron. Do a second, please?
A second.
And who is that?
It's Gail Jackson.
Gail, thank you, and good morning. So we have a first and a second by Aaron and Gail respectively. Do we have any additional conversation, discussion regarding the minutes? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Hi.
Aye. All in favor, all opposed, say nay. I hear no opposition. The minutes pass unanimously. Okay, thank you, everyone. The next item 5 is the review of the draft board business agenda. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Good morning, Chair Wessel and members of the Transit Advisory Committee. The first item that we will be asking the board to consider is an appointment to the Metro Plan Executive Board. I don't have a formal presentation, but wanted to highlight a couple of things from the staff report that's in the packet. Mountain Line has been serving on the Metro Plan or Executive Board for just a little over 1.5 years now, with the first appointment being to Steve Peru, who vacated that seat when he left the community college. And then the appointment was to Dan Acoli with Northern Arizona University, and he vacated that seat this past fall. We have been waiting in the hope that NAU would appoint a new designee to our board of directors. However, the seat is important to Metro Plan's quorum and obviously to the discussions that take place. And so we will be asking the board to consider appointing CCC member Tony Williams. Tony has indicated in email that he's willing. He is still confirming that his schedule will allow him to attend. And so we'll confirm that before the board takes action. If Director Williams is not available to fulfill that appointment, we will have to probably delay making the appointment, as Josh Mayer is currently attending the board meetings on behalf of the university, and he is an alternate and therefore not eligible for the assignment to the executive board for Metro Plan. So it's my very brief update on this item that'll be presented to the board, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions for Heather regarding the Metro Plan appointment? Okay, thank you, Heather. Hearing none, we'll go on to item 2, workforce budget and strategies. Heather, looks like you're up again.
It is me again. Thank you. So this is the first item in our 2023 budget discussion that we will be doing with the Transit Advisory Committee and the Board of Directors. The first item that we're going to present is our workforce budget and strategies. And so this is a review of all the things that we do within our budget to support our workforce. And I want to thank and acknowledge Josh Stone, who is currently serving as our interim management services director, who really assisted in putting together the slides that we're going to go over. And also Danelle Knight, our HR manager, who is responsible for much of the information in the staff report. Next slide. So the items that go into our workforce strategies are illustrated on the next couple of slides. We start with competitive wages. We did a compensation study that was adopted in fiscal year 2020. And then, as you may recall, during the current fiscal year, we did implement a pay adjustment of $3 an hour as part of an effort to improve recruitment and also retaining existing staff due to the wage inflation that we're seeing in our labor market here in Flagstaff. We continue to offer the defined Arizona State Retirement System retirement plan as a public employer. We are required to participate in that, and we match what the employee does put in that as defined by ASRS. We offer health, dental, and vision. We are a participant in the Northern Arizona Public Employer Benefit Trust. So our employees are afforded the same benefit and premiums as the City of Flagstaff, Coconino County, Flagstaff Unified School District, and the community college. And we have various options that employees could choose to participate in, and we have at least one plan that is offered to the employee at no cost for the employee themselves. And then we share in all the other plans as well as dependent coverage. We do offer to all employees a $40,000 life insurance policy. We have our current stay on bonus program, and so this is part of our recruitment and retention effort. They get paid out that bonus over an 18-month period. We have our annual pay increases, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and then we continue to offer incentive programs, recognition, and gratitude. Next slide. We have a couple of leave programs. We offer vacation leave, sick leave, and anniversary leave. So based on the number of years someone has been here with us, they get so many hours of additional leave per year to use. We also offer reward time. This is the benefit of each of us being able to say to someone, hey, really great job this week. Why don't you go home early? We try and offer this across all of our positions where we as leadership step in to help them perform their duties, and they can just take the afternoon off or take a long lunch or come in a little late. And then, as mentioned, we have a recognition program that includes thank you cards and notes, gift cards, and HR recently introduced a raffle program. And then lastly, we offer an anniversary gift. So based on the years that you have served with us, at those milestone anniversaries, your first year, 5, 10, 15, et cetera, we do offer an anniversary gift from our agency. Next slide. We try to support employee development. So we have a continuing education and training opportunities. We have an employee assistance program, and right now we're offering 12 sessions per year. Prior to COVID, we only offered 6. We increased that to 12. We feel like employees still need that support, so we have continued to budget for 12 sessions per year. We have a referral program related to our operator positions. So if you refer someone into and they are hired into our transit operator job, then there is a program, a financial reward for employees that refer those candidates. We do offer CDL training to new hires, so you don't have to come in with a CDL. You don't have to have CDL experience. We'll train you and provide you with that experience. We have a tool allowance for our fleet and facilities staff to help them with the safety gear and tools they need related to their job. And we promote wellness with various wellness activities. We actually have a wellness committee responsible for planning out those things. And we do have wellness room that includes some equipment here, as well as at our downtown connection center and a library of resources. Next slide. In our pay program, our compensation plan that we have adopted is a 4.5% anniversary increase for all staff on our step tables. So the family Of folks on step tables include our operators and our ops supervisors and our operations coordinators. It's really designed to include all the positions that are considered succession. If you served in this role, it's likely you'll increase to this role. And so they all live on step tables. So essentially they start step 0, and by year 10, they have received the maximum wage for that position. All other positions are on open ranges. Those positions are eligible for a 3% anniversary increase. For those staff members, it would take between 20 and 25 years to move through the entire range available to them. In 2023, we're not proposing any new benefits or changes to leave accruals or types of leave, and we're not proposing to change any leave payout rules. So we do have a vacation payout available to employees once a year. We did this year offer some additional payouts for their anniversary leave and volunteer time, because we were restricting when people could take time off work to take advantage of those programs. So we did allow them to pay those out as a one-time, and we're not proposing that would continue in next fiscal year. Next slide. And so really the financial picture is illustrated here on the slide, and I will just point out that this shows a budget increase that is pretty high, but part of that, the majority of that, is related to the off-budget increase that we implemented in 2022, and it was intended to continue in all future years. So indirect staff are those positions that don't change no matter how many programs we offer. Direct are positions that do change based on our service levels. And then you can see that the benefits are increasing. Most of these are outside of our control, and we're just trying to keep employees whole by observing those increases on their behalf. I'll just pause to see if there's any questions on this slide before I go to the next one, since there's a lot of financial data here.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions for Heather from committee members? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Please continue.
All right, I think we're winding down here. The next slide illustrates the budget for the programs that support our staff members. So you can see there, Josh highlighted a few significant increases there on the right-hand side. Overall, it's a 6% increase over these programs. Really, we feel like most of these are driven by the situation that we're in with the ongoing need to recruit, retain our staff. And so these all fit within the budget proposal that we have. And again, we'll look at that bigger picture in May, where we really talk about what our financial standing is and how we can or can't implement these. I will say everything proposed here is sustainable through 2030. Next slide, I think that was the last one. And so I'd be happy to, again, go back over any of our programs or answer any questions that you may have.
And thank you, Heather. Again, any questions for Heather? Looks like you guys, as usual, are on top of the budget and finance, so appreciate that. Keeping the ship sturdy and sailing in the right direction. So let's move on to the next item. Item 3, reopening plan update, and that is Safety Manager Samuel Short.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So this is an update regarding Mountain Lion's COVID-19 reopening plan, which was adopted by the Board of Directors in September of 2020. The plan was made with guidance from the Centers for Disease Control, or the CDC, the FTA, state and local entities as well. The board may provide direction, but there's no recommendation from staff at this time. Next slide, please, Rhonda. So we are currently in phase 3 of our reopening plan, which is where we've been for quite a while. And we try to mirror the city of Flagstaff's, what they're currently doing with their procedures and protocols and their COVID-19 plan. So we pretty much mirrored them through the entire COVID-19 pandemic. So one thing that we do have that is different from the city of Flagstaff is we are required by the Transportation Security Administration Security Directive until March 18th, 2022, to make sure that all employees and customers wear face coverings, whether it be in the office buildings or any of the transportation vehicles. We have been mandated by this security directive since February 1st of 2021. We are also continuing to recommend and apply guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and local and state entities, things like social distancing, face coverings, washing hands, etc., which most everyone is real familiar with. Also, we've had to do some route prioritization due to the pandemic, especially in the recent last 2 months. We've had more cases, or at least half as many cases that we had the prior 19 months altogether. So we've noticed an uptick in COVID-19 positive cases. Next slide, please, Brenda. Our front lobby does remain open for customer service. This way customers can get assistance or buy a pass or anything they might need on a daily basis. Also, most staff have returned to the office, but some, depending on their job, may occasionally work from home, depending on policy and working that out with their manager. Also, we continue to monitor federal, state, and local entities for updated guidance on procedures and protocols related to COVID-19. Some things like the recommendation for an N95 or KN95 mask, and also getting your booster shot within 5 months now instead of 6 months. Next slide, please, Rhonda. Also, CEO and General Manager Heather Dahlman briefed everyone at last month's meeting about the OSHA ETS, or Emergency Temporary Standard, which required employers that have 100 employees or more to mandate a testing and vaccination policy. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled to stay that mandate, and then just afterwards, OSHA actually pulled that emergency temporary standard from service. So it is no longer applicable to us at this time unless somebody else makes it. Next slide, please. That is all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
Are there any questions for Mr. Short? I'm not hearing any, so thank you for that presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next item is the bus stop program. And looks like we have Ann Dunno to present. Ann?
Thank you, Chair Wessel, members of the TAC. Actually, it's not just me today presenting. This is the annual update of our bus stop program, which includes rehabs and bus stop development in the pipeline. And I believe Jeremiah is on the line and would like to introduce himself, and then he's going to take it away on the first few slides. Jeremiah, are you?
Members, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, so just give you basic direction what we're planning to do this year for fiscal year 2022. We evaluate all of our stops based on condition, so paint, rust, structural integrity, and from that we pull a list of priorities. At this time, we are not seeking any new guidance. We are going to follow the same standard that has already been provided. Next slide. So, way we try to be stewards of our assets is every bus stop in the system is maintained at least once per week. Maintenance means we go there, we clean all the glass, we pressure wash them, trying to keep all the salt and debris off of them to keep them lasting longer. Try to keep a good state of repair. We also go a second time a week and we do a quick check. So this check is a safety check. We look for trash, trying to keep up the look of the stops, as well as making sure there's nothing safety related that needs to be taken care of. Our rehabilitation program is 103 to 400 or 140,000 a year. This year, we do not plan to do any horizontal work. It is just the shelters and logo stops themselves. Next slide. So the shelters that we plan on removing are the ones listed here. They are at the higher priority due to age, condition. These stops are going to be removed and replaced with the new standard shelter and the small shelter that we have been moving to. And we will also be replacing the amenities that go with it. Next slide. This list is a little bit more. We are going to be removing and rehabbing a bunch of our logo stops. So the stops themselves are structurally sound, but the paint and condition of them has started to fall. So we're going to have them taken down and rehabbed, repainted, and then placed back into their position. So this is our current rehabilitation program. Anybody have any questions or concerns of what has been?
Any questions at this point? Please continue.
I will pass it off back to Anne and she can take us in the future.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I want to add a little background. Jeremiah is, his role is a maintenance manager. And so, kudos to Jeremiah. He's responsible for not only the facilities and the bus stop, all of our facilities, including our buildings and our fleet. So just wanted to point that out. Next slide, please. Thanks. So a little bit of the pipeline, what we're planning. So bus stop development essentially for Mountain Line typically occurs when we have service change expansions or service changes, bus development, private development happening, and then we have the opportunity to coordinate and or working with the city on when they're doing a road project. We try to integrate upgrades at that time. So there's kind of three ways that we develop new bus stops. And so for the next couple of years, we have actually, and this is actually in our capital improvement plan, which is this new document that Mountain Line has recently taken on. I believe we'll be talking more about that with the budget process with Heather. But it's a draft form. So it's forecasting our capital needs over the next 5 years, of which some of them are bus stops. And in FY23, so pending, of course, budget approval this spring, we're planning to put in new bus stops, kind of a phase one associated with our Route 8 extension, transit service planning. We also will hope to be able to contribute towards the bus lanes and the bus stops for the Beulah Road extension. The city is extending Beulah. And as part of that, we've been working with the city for many years to integrate transit improvements. So we're looking forward to that. And the other third one in FY23 is a stop improvement at Tacos Los Altos on Route 66. It's just, we see it as a high priority need for a shelter at that location. It's challenging with the right of way. So pending grant funds, we hope to be able to make that improvement in the next fiscal year. And then in FY24, looking out ahead, we do, in coordination with the hospital expansion, we're talking about putting placeholder planning for bus stop improvements associated with that route extension. And then also a kind of a coordinated project with, there's a potential development on Lake Mary. We've been chatting with the developer in the city and in improving the bus stop as part of that project. Next slide, please, Rhonda. So before I move on, is there any questions about kind of the next plans in the pipeline for bus stop improvements? Okay.
Any questions? I see no hands raised or hear any voices shouting, so carry on.
Great, thanks, Dave. So wanted to also provide a little background on how we determine what kind of amenities go at stops. And this is also related to our planning aspect. And this is a map that actually we developed in 2019. And it hasn't actually changed in terms of new improvements since then, or upgrades at bus stops. So I just wanted to kind of bring this back. This is probably a different group than we talked to a few years ago. And it really just demonstrates our the equity essentially across our system, and kind of split it between east and west side of town. But you can kind of see that we essentially have similar number of shelters distributed on the west side versus the east side, and then the logo stops and our unimproved stops are about the same percentage across the network. And those unimproved stops are sign stops, and those are ones when you look at the locations, they are typically in areas where we're limited with right-of-way and budget as well. So I just wanted to kind of show this network layout before I move on to kind of talking more about how we determine what goes in at bus stops. Does anyone have any questions about the map?
Questions for Ann? I think it's looking good, so let's hear more.
All right, next slide, please. As part of the transit guideline project that Estella managed a few years ago and was adopted by the board, the transit guidelines, we did have a scoring criteria, a document to help guide internal staff and external partners to identify what kind of improvements go in at different bus stop locations. And so, it's got ridership, land use, kind of what's going on in that area, and it's a scoring criteria. And then from there, it identifies, the level of improvements. So type 1 is a sign only stop, and type 4 would be our most improved stop with, shelter and other types of improvements. So next slide, please. And so a little bit of the challenges that we have found in the areas where we haven't been able to put in as many improvements as we'd like, as I said earlier, is the available right-of-way has definitely been a constraint. Our standard bus stop pad in a typical road cross section actually doesn't fit behind the sidewalk. There's always a little bit of the pad that's outside of the right-of-way typically. And so in order to be able to put in shelters of that full development, we need that support from the adjacent landowner to provide an easement. And so that's been one of our challenges. We've, I think as an agency over the years, done a really good job developing good relationships with adjacent owners and getting their commitment based on goodwill to sign off on the transit easements that we have received. But I think looking to the future where, we probably need to look at developing this easement policy that's going to help us outline the steps that we take to develop stops. So, it could be starting with that approach of talking to the adjacent owner, but, looking at also approaching landowners with a fair market value and acquisition of an easement. So paying for the easement essentially, which we haven't done in the past. And then bringing that policy forward to the board for review and consideration for approval. And I think, this type of a policy would help our staff internally, it would help our partners. It would just be more of a transparent way that we go about improving our facilities in the right of way. So with that, are there any questions about the approach on that policy?
Any questions regarding the easement policy? I know I have one, but I'll see if there's any other.
This is
committee
Julian.
members.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Legal attorneys, do they come into this and add to the costs when you're trying to buy a right of way?
Yes, Jillian, I would say the following the steps to be able to provide a fair market value will increase our development costs. We will have appraisal fees process, as is any effort that we take that involves acquiring an easement, we do have legal support services. I don't know if Heather has anything to add on that. We do seek legal advice, typically on projects when we need to. So Heather, do you have any other additions to that?
No, I would just say our original approach, Jillian, was to have legal develop a standard easement agreement. So there was some invested cost initially that we have been successfully using, and that easement document has been successful in many locations. But as we look at what does an easement look like in the future, as Ann has pointed out, all these things that we need to consider, our budget cost for easements will have to include additional legal fees.
Yes, because my working experience was that the legal fees could cost almost as much as the land you're purchasing
Yes.
by the time you're finished.
Right.
Which is unfortunate. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and I guess one thing about a typical easement, the good thing is typically the square footage is pretty small. It's a small footprint normally. So, hoping between that and the that efficient process with legal, as Heather mentioned, that we could develop a really smooth process that we can predict the budget amount to include if we're going to look at developing a stop that we know is already out of the right of way. And then we just can build that into our budgets and our process.
Excellent. Any other questions? So I do have a question regarding a couple questions, one regarding the policy and one regarding, I guess it's your capital plan. It might be in the Flagstaff in Motion plan. So given the city's carbon neutrality plan and the possibility, maybe even probability of expanded transit service and reliance on transit, is eminent domain going to be part of your policy discussions?
Dave, thank you. That's a very good question. I think as you know, Mountain Line does not have power of eminent domain. That does not, it's not under our authority. I do believe this easement policy is going to open up, I would think, that discussion with the board on how they would like to consider that. And then I really would come down to what's the value of getting that improvement to the goal of the project or the expand, of the service, and the will of essentially our agency to work with our city and or DOT partner to obtain the needed real estate to be able to do the improvement. But I do think it would be a valuable component discussion, whether or not it's actually written into the policy. I mean, I guess that we could see how that works. Heather, I don't know if you have any additions on that.
Yeah, I just want to point out that these are all things, Dave, that we still need to adventure through. And as Ann pointed out, we don't have eminent domain rights. Mm-hmm. And I want to go back to Jeremiah mentioned how many bus stops we have and remind us all that we've done that through goodwill with many of our neighbors. And so that's always our first initiative. It's really that we have a couple of spots that have been difficult and wanting to be sure that we're providing equitable access based on neighborhoods and where stops are at and things along that line, which continues to come up when we have a property owner that maybe is more challenging to work with. So I think that eminent domain would be our last desired solution, and we will continue to use wherever we can goodwill first. But I really appreciate Ann saying we need to put together a policy so that we know if goodwill fails, what are those next steps and how far are we willing to go? So I appreciate the question, but I just wanted to remind us all that we have been very successful with many partners and neighbors in our community, even homeowners, and we'll continue to try and build that transit is part of a community solution and continue building on those relationships.
Those are all excellent points, and thank you. And I'll commend Jeremiah and his team for maintaining that goodwill through an excellent maintenance practices. So appreciate that. Then my next question is, this can be kind of a yes or no answer. it sounds like you're perhaps projecting some or anticipating some increased expenses, and are these being built into, the CIP and the 5-year long-range transit plans?
Yeah, Dave, thank you for that question. Yes, I would say looking at, some of the budgets we've developed at the, planning stages, they have an order of magnitude that I think at this point would, cover some of the, if we were to just purchase an easement, if that, again, to Heather's comment, if the goodwill effort was not successful. But you're right. I think that's a really good point, that as part of our planning effort, we need to go a step further and, maybe even get some estimates. So we can definitely build those into the budget if we think we're going to have challenges. Does that help?
That does. Excellent. Thank you. And then last comment, I think in the report, there was a $75,000 figure that had a period instead of a comma. So
thank you. I think
the last comment there. Any additional questions for Ann or Jeremiah at this point? All right. Well, thank you very much. It was an excellent report. You guys do great work on getting those stops in place and keeping them maintained. So thank you. The next item is item 5, which is the Mountain Line Go quarterly update.
Thank you, Chair and members of the TAC. My name is Estella Hollander, and I'm the mobility planner with Mountain Line. And I keep going back, Rhonda. Thank you. Awesome. And so Mountain Line Go is a pilot project that we are doing to test out microtransit. And this launched on November 1st. And so we have been running this service for 3 months now. And so this pilot service is grant funded. This is with one-time grant funds to test out microtransit, focusing on the Huntington and Industrial Corridor. And so microtransit is a flexible service, meaning there is no fixed route or stops, and it's real-time hailed. So rides can be booked either through an app called Mountain Line Go, or there's a calling option as well. And the focus is really to utilize this emerging technology. We are partnering with a software company for this app development, as well as to be able to pair rides in an efficient manner. So people going with similar origins and destinations, pairing people together. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And so this pilot project is focused on the Huntington Industrial Corridor, which is pictured here on the map. So kind of this longer rectangle in yellow, that's the focus of this area, really bringing better access to this corridor and allow for better mobility options. So there are some fixed routes surrounding this area. However, with railroad tracks to the north and the I-40 to the south, really causes some physical barriers to access some of the nearby bus stops. So this area includes kind of that longer rectangle, as well as the surrounding bus stops and the Walmart on the east side, as well as our mall connection center. So someone could get a ride on demand anywhere within this yellow area or within the corridor. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And so for some ridership updates, so again, we launched November 1st. We did have kind of a slow start, wanted to sort of do a soft launch in terms of our marketing and outreach, just to see how the demand was going. And in the midst of that, we were having a driver shortage. So didn't want to, I guess, inundate the demand too much. And so, yeah, November had a slow start, but then really ramped up some of our marketing efforts in both December and January, which you can see, month over month, we are increasing boardings, which is great. The next item is the people with first trip, which I think is great to monitor just to make sure that this is increasing, that again, we're expanding our outreach and more people are utilizing the service. And then reoccurring riders, tracking that to make sure, again, that people are finding value in this service and are keep using it. For average wait time, the goal is to keep it 20 minutes or under. On-time pickups is, majority around 100%, but then December we had a few later pickup times. Trips booked within the app. So this is also important that we're tracking just to make sure people are aware of the app or if they have any questions so that they are utilizing it. But of course, we do have that calling option as well. This area definitely, equity was really a main focus to make sure that we do have both that call-in option and the app, because not everyone has a smartphone or they may not have data on their phone. So making sure we are providing options for people. And then average customer review. So keeping track of that. We have actually the past week have had 2 negative reviews, but we are kind of following up with the customers, making sure, that we are following our, customer complaint process, things like that. Next slide, please. And so this is one of our avid Go writers. I'll read this quote from her, from Sandra Walsh, but I am 86 years old and I go to Walmart to get 1 to 2 weeks worth of groceries. It's very difficult for me to maneuver my cart on the bus. She calls it the $1 bus. It is easier to get my cart on there since there's more room and the driver puts the lift down for me. The people on there are very friendly and the drivers are wonderful. So she was one of the first people to use the service and has kind of kept using it since. So just wanted to share that with you all. Next slide, please. And so in terms of marketing and outreach, so this has very much been kind of a boots on the ground approach. So we've done a lot of outreach events at the various organizations within the corridor, as well as some kind of surrounding the area. So every month been doing a variety of events of really going, again, to these agencies, talking with the potential writers, making sure they know how to use the app. I've actually, talked with people, downloaded the app on their phone, gave them a free promo code to test out the service. So I think, this area, people may not be as much, on social media, so I think it's important that we are going out into the community and trying to make those connections to also teach people how to use the service. This is new for Flagstaff, new for everyone in terms of this on-demand type service. So I think it's been really beneficial to actually, again, go out and make those connections and teach people how to use the service. We've also done some flyer distribution, kind of an email campaign to various listservs in the community, trainings with some of the staff in the corridor. So again, making sure that the staff at, like, for example, Northland Family Help Center or at the shelter are aware of the service. They know, how to book a trip either through the app or calling. So we've been doing a couple online trainings with those staff so that they can, share this service to their clients. Social media posts. We also have, advertisements on the bus as well as on the fixed route inside the bus, but also on the outside of the vans, and have been doing some promo codes. So this things like, try this service for free to get people to use the service, but also have some partnerships with the organizations in the corridor itself. So again, like the shelter, I think it's with 8 different organizations where they can actually give out promo codes to their clients in case, finances are a barrier, or just to make sure that they're able to get this trip. Next slide, please. And so for next steps, so outreach to the organizations in the corridor, definitely continue doing that. Majority of the trips have been to and from the shelter, which is great, but I think just wanting to make sure to get some more ridership from the other organizations in the surrounding area. So doing a little bit more targeted outreach to those places, to continue to boost app usage. So anytime there is a rider who is booking by calling our front desk and booking a ride that way, I'll call them to see how their trip went, but just make sure that they're aware of an app or have any questions and things like that. We will be doing a satisfaction survey in March as well, which will help with either the planning of the pilot to see if we have to make any changes, but as well as help with if this becomes a long-term program, kind of understand how people are using the pilot, but also some potential changes that we may need to make. As well as, so as I mentioned previously, this pilot is grant funded. And so we do have some excess capacity in the budget and to expand the service. So we have been coordinating with the city of Flagstaff to try an airport service for microtransit. So this would be connections anywhere within Flagstaff city limits to the airport. And so this would be, as long as there is an origin and destination with the airport, someone could get picked up and then brought to the airport. And so in the staff report, it stated this would start in February 1st, but we have postponed it slightly just to make sure we have enough operators as well as get our marketing materials completed. So it will begin March 1st. So I think this will be just a great opportunity to see how to serve the airport. I think it will be a quick pilot, but it'll provide some important data to see, if maybe microtransit is the solution or potentially fixed route. So I think this is, again, just a great opportunity to try and serve this area that currently is not served by any public transportation. Next slide, please. I believe this is my last. Awesome. Thank you, Rhonda. And thank you all. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Estella. Questions for Estella?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Estella. This is pretty exciting. This looks like it's really building up for you, which is pretty cool. I had kind of just a nuts and bolts question, and maybe I missed it. So you have the service area of the initial program. You can have a trip start or end there, and then the service takes you to the appropriate bus stop, or takes you actually to your final destination. I understand the airport one was any destination to the airport. Is that the way this service works as well?
So the current service in the Huntington Industrial Corridor, I guess within that kind of rectangle area, it is door to door. So you could go, for example, the guidance center to the shelter, but then it also includes those surrounding bus stops. So then you would be dropped off at the bus stop. Does that make sense?
So you can get picked up in the rectangle and taken anywhere, and anywhere could be an adjacent bus stop, or just within the rectangle door to door. I guess I still don't understand. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Rhonda, do you mind going back to the map? That might help. It's a few slides. Thank you. So essentially all of these kind of yellow circles that are highlighted, those you could get picked up or dropped off at. And then this kind of yellow rectangle, that is door-to-door service. So you could get, picked up at the shelter, dropped off at the bus stops near that Walmart Supercenter or the Mall Connection Center, for example. So yeah, basically it includes any of the surrounding bus stops that are shown in yellow.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. Okay, and so the airport service is going to differ because you can get picked up anywhere or to the airport or the airport back. Okay.
Correct.
Interesting. I'm really curious how popular that will be, and I'm sure you all are as well. Thank you. This is good stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Baumann. Any other questions? I know I have a couple. Okay, so first, I just want to really commend Estella and the Mountain Line staff, and my dogs are about to bark, so I'll apologize for that. I'll ask my question. You can get to it. Will there be a fare for the airport?
There will be. And so for this current service, the Huntington Industrial Corridor, it's a $1 trip. For the airport, it will be a $2 trip. So still, very inexpensive, but it is, a larger service area. So kind of figuring out what the right fare is. Obviously, if we would serve the airport by fixed route, it would most likely be our same $1.25 one-way fare for an adult. So this is a little bit higher than that. So that'll be part of this pilot as well, as kind of, seeing, what the fare should be. But currently we're setting it at $2 per person per trip.
Okay, thank you very much. Any final questions for Estella?
This is Gillian. One of the things suddenly jumps to mind with the airport and the $2 trip. Where do the taxi drivers come in? I'm just thinking at the airport. Do they know this is coming? I don't know if there's a question. It is just a thought running through my mind.
Thank you, Jillian. I think, we'll definitely will need to, I think this will be part of our, marketing and outreach, which currently we're still finalizing the material. So have not, started the outreach process yet. But this, is another service. So, I mean, obviously taxi companies will not be going away, but I think it'll help fill, especially those morning trips. I didn't mention, but the airport service will actually start at 4:30 a.m. and go till 9:30 p.m. So it will help fill, that morning gap, which is harder to find a taxi, even an Uber or Lyft. But yeah, this will be just another service.
Excellent. And I see Gail Jackson has her hand raised.
I do. I just thank you, Chair Wessel. I just wanted to add, Jillian, just a comment. As someone who uses the airport frequently and has businesses flying in and out of there, taxis, Ubers, and Lyfts really are not available. We've had several potential businesses that almost missed their flights where they thought they'd scheduled a taxi and no one ever showed up. So I support this program so much. It's so needed. And hopefully this will help the Ubers and the Lyfts and the taxi cabs to up their game. There's only so many flights that come in a day, and we need reliable service. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. That's really provides some context and perspective. Any other questions for Estella? All right, let's move on to the next item then. It looks like it's the second quarter performance report with the new Associate Transit Planner, Brody Smith.
Hi, hello. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee for allowing me to present today. I'm very excited about it. To those of you I haven't met yet, I am Brody Smith. I'm the new Associate Transit Planner with Mountain Line. I'm currently finishing my MPA at Syracuse and will be starting in person in August with Mountain Line. Today, I'm here to present performance reports and ridership data for the first half of fiscal year 2022. Next slide, please. So here we see our fixed route ridership. The lighter line you see at the top of the graph represents fiscal year 2020 ridership data. That is pre-pandemic data. As you see, we had that fall off. The darker line is fiscal year 2021 data. And then the bars on the graph represent 2022 data. So we see that we have not yet reached pre-pandemic numbers again with our ridership, but we are on an upward trend from fiscal year 2021, and we expect to see those numbers continue to increase. Next slide, please. We see much the same with our paratransit program. We have not yet reached pre-pandemic numbers, but we are on an increase from fiscal year 2021. We see somewhat of a decline in our paratransit ridership as we have more convenient options available for our paratransit eligible riders. We don't expect to see any major decreases, but we do expect to see lower costs and more trips per hour in the coming months. So next slide, please. Here we have our ridership for city taxi data, our city taxi program. Both the city and county taxi programs continue to provide reliable service to paratransit eligible riders. We expect to see ridership continue to grow and hopefully reach pre-pandemic numbers soon. So next slide, please. Same with the county. Next slide. Here's our Vanpool data. Vanpool ridership has maintained or been pretty steady throughout the pandemic due to a majority of our users being from the healthcare field. A lot of them use the Vanpool ridership together to get to work. So throughout the pandemic, we've seen consistent ridership and expect to do so in the future. So next slide, please. Here's the microtransit pilot that Estella was just talking about. It is a new program, so we don't have a ton of data on our ridership, but as she stated, we expect to see it growing in the coming months. Next slide. I think this is my last. Yes, so the planning staff has no recommendations at this time, but I welcome any questions you guys have.
Thank you, Brody. Any questions for Brody? Okay, I do have just kind of one comment on your very first graph. If you could beef up the legend so it's a little more legible. It was kind of buried in small font at the top of the slide.
If we could go back to the fixed route, yeah, I can explain.
And then Now, I think Estella reported on the January figures for Mountain Line for micro transit. So those could be added to your graph as well.
Yes, I'll make a note of that and get those adjusted.
And then this is perhaps a question directed towards more towards Heather. I think it was in this report that had some projections, and they seemed very conservative in terms of future ridership and recovery from the pandemic, and as well as the goals associated with those. Is there, I guess, what are you hearing in the industry? What are you seeing in Flagstaff, and what's behind those conservative figures?
So I want to acknowledge that Kate brought forward her concerns too with those very, very, very conservative figures. So we were very focused on reporting the end of the quarter information and getting that data to you. Josh, being new to this process, there weren't enough questions, and we didn't flesh out those projections well. So I do not believe that the conservative projection of 1% growth is accurate. We are actually seeing a better recovery than that. We anticipate that next year, next fiscal year, we will continue to see that recovery rate and growth. And so we do need to update our 2025 and 2029 projections accordingly. And before this goes to the board, we will be updating those numbers, and we'll send you a corrected staff report.
Fantastic, thank you. And nice job, Brody. Any other questions for Brody or Heather? Okay. Well, welcome, Brody. We look forward to seeing you in August. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Next item would be Flagstaff in motion with transit planner Busy Collins.
Thank you, Dave. Chair Dave and members of the Transit Advisory Committee. My name is Busy Collins. I'm transit planner for Mountain Line. Today, I'll be talking about Flagstaff in Motion project. I am joined by members of the AECOM team, Daksha, Andrew, Tyler, and Bob. And I just want to first outline that the objective of this presentation is to bring the TAC and the board along with us in our process. So we do have a lot to cover. I'm happy to take questions to clarify, but at this time, we're not seeking feedback on specific draft improvements or scenarios. Staff will refine these and bring recommendations next time for detailed review and feedback. So I just wanted to kind of frame the presentation there. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And these are the topics that we'll be going through. Next slide, please, Rhonda. So the agenda packet, I just want to remind you, the agenda packet does have the complete list of prioritized needs. So as I go through this first part, please reference that for complete details. And then you also have in your agenda packet the evaluation criteria. So you can reference that for any details, since I will be going through those two items pretty quickly, since we had presented them in the past. Next slide, please. So I briefly want to remind you of the process of how we arrived at the prioritized list of needs. So you've seen the TAC and board results on this screen, guiding staff on development of evaluation. Pictured here is also the Citizen Advisory Committee results. And these are representatives of ridership groups. So people from who work in healthcare, people who work with people experiencing homelessness, et cetera. And so that Citizen Advisory Committee results, I think pictured here in blue, I think is really interesting that we had general agreement on those top priorities. However, the transit dependent populations was a higher priority to the Citizen Advisory Committee than it was to the TAC and the board. But still, at least having the top two priorities, I think that's really great. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And here, this should look somewhat familiar. On the bottom is the map of equity index across our service area by neighborhood. And this was shown in October, and we did conduct a technical analysis on routes and neighborhoods. So here's pictured routes. The next slide is neighborhoods. And we also scored public input for each route and area. So here you can see the technical analysis score, the public input score, and then the total score. And this is currently ranked. And so this just helps us really understand how we prioritize the various needs to then come to our improvements in our scenarios. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And these routes and neighborhoods were both using similar criteria. So here's a picture of the neighborhoods. Next slide, please, Rhonda. But both using similar criteria, looking at activity density and the equity index, as an indicator for transit dependent populations. And here is the ranking for neighborhoods. And so the routes and the neighborhoods were combined. Next slide, please, Rhonda, into one prioritized list. And again, that is in your packet. And then we took this list and we screened it to arrive at the needs. So we looked at every single item, each route, each neighborhood, identified whether it has adequate transit service or access currently. So access could mean bus stops if they're close enough. It could mean ped bike connections, operational issues on current routes. That could be on-time performance issues. And then the electric bus charging, is that accommodated? So with our ZEB plan, the zero emission bus transition plan, we did identify how much charging time was needed per bus. There are 3 of our 9 routes that do need additional time in the layover to accommodate that charging time. So there is adjustment needed there. So we took these 3 needs or these 3 questions and addressed each route and neighborhood. And if all of these things, if there wasn't a problem, if a area had adequate transit service or access, there were no operational issues on the current route and no need for that electric bus charging time, then we identified that as not a need. And we would eliminate that to arrive at that final prioritized list of needs. And again, that's in your packet. So I'm going to pause there before I move on to improvements and scenarios, if there's any questions. Awesome.
Thank you, Busy. Any questions for Busy at this point? Okay, hearing none. Busy, please continue.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And let's go 2 slides forward. Next one, please. So improvements and scenarios. So we took that prioritized list of needs and screened it. And we then, with our needs, we identified what solutions make sense for each problem. So we really, you can see the prioritized need on the left, Route 66 or a neighborhood, West Route 66 areas. And then you see that we identified problems that we're trying to solve. So what's going on? And then solutions that make sense. So that's just a screenshot of kind of how the sausage was made for us to arrive at problems and solutions. And these solutions were then turned into improvements. And the improvement categories, we got pretty specific on that screenshot on the top, but they generally fall into 4 categories: new routes or changes to routes, frequency and service hours, microtransit zones, which Estella did an awesome job really introducing us to microtransit or reminding us of our microtransit pilot. So those microtransit zones would be very much similar service delivery to what that microtransit pilot currently is. And then capital improvements, that could be bike and ped improvements, bus stop improvements, etc. And then with these improvements, we package them into 3 scenarios. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And here's the 3 scenarios. Generally, it's scenario 1 is a bit of a mix between fixed route and microtransit. So some frequency increases, also some microtransit to support areas, some new coverage with microtransit. Scenario 2 was very focused in microtransit improvements. And you'll see that here. I'm going to go through each of these scenarios. And the 3rd scenario is fixed route and capital improvement. So a bit of, I guess what I would say is that we had multiple improvements for each problem that we identified. And the goal of these scenarios was very much just making sure that each improvement could get scored through the evaluation. And just want to make sure that at least they're all represented. I wouldn't say that these scenarios are where I want them now. Staff will be refining them, refining improvements, refining scenarios, and providing those recommendations to the TAC and board next time we see you. So next slide, please, Rhonda. And so here's, it's again, the kitchen sink approach, just kind of threw everything in somewhere to just so we could get some evaluation scoring and really understand how these various improvements help us achieve our goals. And yep, again, we will be coming back to you in March with a deep dive on recommended scenarios. And next slide, Rhonda. And so here is the first scenario, so that frequency and coverage kind of fixed route and microtransit approach. A few things I want to point out, I'm not going to dive into all of these, is that we do have a hospital route on every scenario. We do think that the hospital coming online and having some form of transit service is a baseline condition, and it is reflected in each scenario. With that hospital route, we do anticipate adjusting routes 4 and 14 into one single route. And that's just to reduce duplication on the Milton corridor from the new hospital route. And then we did play around with various late night service. You can see here we have microtransit looking 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. Friday and Saturday only, potentially 3/4 mile around the fixed route service. We also looked at fixed route late nights. You can see that in the next row down under frequency and service hours, Friday and Saturday transit service to 1 a.m., maybe on a few routes only. We also looked around at Saturday weekday frequency and span. You'll see on the next couple slides that we played around with another Saturday opportunity, trying to just improve that service level. And the very last item on the far right bottom is a kiss and ride location indicated by stars. So the goal with this improvement is to address those communities that are living beyond city limits that don't currently have transit service. So trying to identify maybe a phased approach to give them access to transit within city limits. And the concept with the kiss and ride is, so say up on Fort Valley Road, top left of that map where the star is, an individual is coming from Baderville, has a passenger in the car with them. They pull into a separate pullout adjacent to a bus pullout and stop. And the driver drops off their passenger gets on the bus. The individual in the car continues on their car, and that would be reversed at the end of the day, most likely. But really just kind of phasing in, not necessarily a park and ride. Maybe park and ride is our long-term solution, but having a short-term solution that seems like low-hanging fruit. I know there's definitely costs associated right away, and did a great job with their bus stops. There's a lot of considerations, right? But we were kind of excited about that as a phase-in approach, and it was a recommendation that came from the county. Next slide, please. And here we have scenario 2. So there's many more microtransit areas. You still see the hospital. The hospital route has a variation on it that continues on to the airport. And you'll also notice Route 7, so where it says East Flagstaff in the yellow circle, we are proposing Route 7. We're trying to figure out Route 7 has operational issues, and it also needs an additional minute for electric bus charging. So the current runtime is very challenging. So we played around with a lot of concepts with Route 7. Here's one of them. It's a shortened concept that it would go north on 4th Street, loop around the new 4th and Lockett roundabout, and return back south on 4th. We'll see how it scores. Not sure. It saves some runtime. It would probably allow us to keep our same frequency, still serve those same areas, and support the Sunnyside Greenlaw areas with microtransit. So again, just some concepts. Something else I'd like to point out is the very bottom right is the frequency service hours. So here we're proposing Saturday service match weekday frequency, so high frequency, however, the span would remain on a weekend span. So kind of a hybrid on that Saturday option. Yeah, next slide, please, Rhonda. And then here is our third and final scenario. This is the true kitchen sink. Some members of the Citizen Advisory Committee really liked it because they loved all the service. On the east side of Flagstaff, you can see there's a ton of duplication that will be refined. I don't think I could recommend that much duplication, but we can really explore how various loops look. So you can see on the under new routes or changes to current routes section, there is a ton of new routes. We're saying maybe there's an express route from the mall connection center to the downtown connection center. Maybe there's a 4th Street north and south bus that helps connect, just gets people north and south very quickly to other routes. There's also commuter routes. You can see in the smaller map picture, we're proposing commuter routes, which would be 6 to 9 a.m., 3 to 6 p.m. weekdays only, going out to each of the neighboring communities. And then just bringing them into, you can see on the map, just into the fixed route city limits, and then they would transfer to another bus. And then the last item I want to point out is capital improvements. So this is where we really loaded capital improvements on. Bus stop additions, we saw a lot of great coverage gaps on existing routes just with bus stop additions. So that will be a recommendation. Transit signal priority, so you can see my example from the last slide, Route 7. Route 7 remains in its same form in this scenario, but we have TSP, transit signal priority, per recommendations from our strategic investment plan. So specifically that Butler corridor, I think, is what helped us the most. And we did see that transit signal priority could shave the amount of minutes that we need for our runtime. So we will continue to look into that. Bike and pedestrian improvements and maybe e-bike scooter share. Of course, Mountain Line would not be implementing bike and pedestrian improvements or a scooter share, e-bike share, but we would absolutely be looking for grant opportunities and partnership opportunities with our partners. Let's see, so that's all I have in scenarios. I'd be happy to answer any questions on it. I also have a few more slides and then I'll be handing it over to Daksha. So just want to pause briefly for any questions on what I've presented so far.
Questions or comments? Hey, I have a couple just on this map. I think it would be great if you would highlight which routes are new in your list on the right. And then on I think the very first map, your legend, the colors slipped down a notch. So it was took me a while to catch up with where you were. So, they all need to move up a line in terms of your dots, colored dots. I'm curious, and this is really kind of almost a comment for Estella in her previous presentation. We're at a quarterly report. It ends in June. Probably some kind of schedule for decision making on whether the pilot was successful and how we might continue that or not would be an important part of that presentation. And back to the scenarios here, given that you have that kind of known gap in service there, was kind of a little surprised that microtransit in that area wasn't kind of almost a feature of every scenario here. So those are my comments, but this is pretty exciting. It'll be interesting to see how you say they all score. Any other questions or comments at this point? Okay, let's continue on.
Thank you, Dave. Next slide, please, Rhonda. Next slide. So moving on to evaluation criteria. Not going to focus here long. We did discuss this in October. Here is our evaluation criteria and the weights. I will say that it was very challenging for us to put anything less than high. We know that every single criteria on this list is important to us, to our riders, to our service. So it's hard to make things less important. So when we do have lows or mediums, I wouldn't say that it's not important. We just needed some breaks in our points. We are looking to refine these weights now that we have the evaluation scoring, which Daksha will go through shortly. And so we do plan to refine these as needed. If results are coming out just a little weird, we can go back and look at how things are scoring and maybe adjust. So just want to mention that again, this is in your packet. Next slide, please, Rhonda.
Busy, can I add something to the evaluation criteria weights?
Sure.
Yeah. So when we were giving priority to the evaluation criteria, we made sure that it aligns with the goals of the overall plan and with the priorities that the board and CAC had voted for, which was better ridership and transit dependent population. And so when we provided weights to the evaluation criteria, we made sure that some of those criteria have higher weight compared to the other. So if you go back a slide, Rhonda. Ridership has been weighted higher, and some of the transit dependent population and destinations that are used by transit dependent population are also weighted higher, just to make sure that those priorities are captured and our scoring aligns with those goals.
Excellent points, Daksha. Thank you so much. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And the next one. So here I'm just going to walk through briefly our current routes and how they scored going through that evaluation criteria. So the red indicates it had the highest score for each of those criterions. You can see Route 10 lights up. It's around a lot of density, right? So the existing population employment, that's no big surprise. Transit efficiency, that's really driven by transfer opportunities, among some others. I think span and frequency are also in transit efficiency. So this is also very reflective of current service. Route 10 has the best service among our routes. So it's not surprising that it does score really well, but there's also a lot of existing conditions that are reflected here. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And Route 2 definitely lights up a bunch on that last slide and here again. So there are some, we definitely know that Route 2's really hitting a lot of important, our criteria of importance. And next slide, please, Rhonda. And here is just the final ranked routes using the evaluation criteria. I wouldn't say that, Route 2 is our most important route. It simply hits the most criteria that we've identified. And again, Route 5 is at the bottom of the list. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but again, this is very reflective of the service we currently provide today. So, ridership will be reflective of frequency, and those are linked together. So you can definitely see a lot of those factors reflective here. And yeah, go ahead.
I can just highlight the overall goal of the baseline evaluation here, Busy. So the reason why we are conducting this evaluation for existing routes is to see how they score in different categories, different criteria, which aligns with our goals. And so when we go forward with making any kind of changes to these routes in our scenarios, whether it is changing the route alignment or adding some 2 hours to the span of service or changing frequency, then we wanted to see how it changes the score, like whether the score goes down if we change the alignment or whether it goes up. And that was the main goal of conducting this baseline analysis.
Thanks, Daksha. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Daksha. Rhonda, would you advance 2 slides, please? And Rhonda and Daksha, it's all yours.
Sure. I think Gillian had a question, so I can respond to that.
Yes, I had a question going back to the previous slide. Route 2 runs every 20 minutes. The other's about half an hour. I think I'm in that. And probably the university route runs much more frequently, but I think that like to see there's a relationship between ridership and frequency, because to me they're very key. 20 minutes makes you take the bus more reliably than half an hour. So that was just, I hope that's captured.
Yes, it is.
It adequately captured the fact that a more frequent service is more attractive.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So we did capture existing ridership for Route 2, and which had a high weight, that was 15 points. And so that's one of the reasons. So then Route 2 scored well with existing ridership, and all these scores from different criteria, they add up. So if Route 2 is scoring really good in most of the criteria, or in the top 5 in most of the criteria, then you would see that it will rank higher in the overall score. And that's why we have such various criteria, so that it's not like we are just giving importance to ridership, but we're also looking at destinations, demographic, and any future developments, like where new developments are coming up within the Flagstaff area. So when we consider all the different data points, it's easier to understand which route is doing well with everything and not just with one criterion.
Fine, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we conducted our preliminary evaluation just based on the weights and then changes that Busy just explained to for every service recommendation. So scenario 1, if we see, is more focused, is a combination of fixed route and microtransit, where we are not just trying to achieve a high ridership, but we also want to add in coverage, but coverage by not adding like all new routes the way we saw in scenario 3. So it's a combination of improvement to existing service, adding some new routes to improve coverage, but adding microtransit zones to improve coverage as well. And so when we looked at just the fixed routes and how they score, Route 7 definitely scored higher. Now, some of the changes that we have made in this scenario is adjusting the alignment of Route 7, where it goes to that Gemini loop, and then adjusting some of the Saturday's service span and frequency. And with that, Route 7 shows the most promise to serve the transit-dependent population and improve ridership, along with serving some destinations and future developments as well. Followed by Route 2, followed by then Route 10, Route 66, the 4 and 14 loop. The new hospital route is somewhere in the middle of this whole list because the existing density along that route in the southern area is comparatively less to some of the other routes or within the central area of Flagstaff. And that's why it scores low in the overall list. Then it's Route 3. Again, Ponderosa Trails, which is on the east side, where some of the development is residential and low density, I would say, and some of the area is still developing there. So with that, it goes down the list. And then there's Route 8 and then Route 5. So Route 5 here, we kind of improved the frequency. Yes, we improved the frequency. And then in one of the other options, we were looking at it just from an express route perspective. And so I think that's part of scenario 2. So maybe Rhonda, we can go to the next slide and I can talk about scenario 2 scoring.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe you can just stop subtitles and it will zoom back again.
There we go. It's not me. I can see it, but I can't. Thank you. It's not that. It's this one. All right, thank you.
Perfect. So for scenario 2, again, we evaluated all the existing routes and new routes. And when I say existing route, there were some service improvements recommended for the existing routes. So in the previous scenario, the service improvement for the existing routes was some realignment of route 2 and having a weekday frequency and span on Saturdays. But in scenario 2, what we did is we kept the weekend span of service, but improved the Saturday frequency. So we were just trying to make some small adjustments and see how the overall scoring changes with these small adjustments, basically trying to understand how much it impacts the overall service. And in here as well, the new hospital route, it goes further from Fort Tuthill to the Flagstaff airport. And so the route scores a little lower in this scenario. And that's because as it moves to the airport area, the density drops down a lot. Population, although employment is better, but not as compared to what it showed for just till Fort Tuthill. And then route 5 and route 8, again, you can see here are like some of the bottom routes. Route 7 and route 10 are some of the higher scoring routes. Route 7 and 2. And I saw that the transit dependent population, Title VI communities, healthcare facilities, affordable housing, both these routes score really good in all those criteria, and that's why they score high overall. Next slide, please. So scenario 3, there were a lot of routes in this scenario just to understand how the routes would score if we try to improve coverage to just fixed routes and not microtransit zone. And the previous scenario just focused on improving coverage to microtransit zone. And scenario 1 was more of a combination of new routes and microtransit zones. So in here, the new hospital routes scores really well. And the alignment was changed here where the route starts, goes all the way up to the existing hospital area. And so it goes through the main downtown Flagstaff area and it captures all that density, population and employment, some activity centers. Busy, would you like to add to that?
Yeah. We are proposing in scenario 3 that the new hospital route is a bus rapid transit route. And so there's a higher frequency, et cetera, things going on there, maybe to help that projected ridership. I would assume it scored really well there too. Thanks, Daksha.
And then route 2 is still there on the top. Something that new got added was the Gemini loops with the Boulder Point, like it goes through all the areas. And that's the green route that you see there. It goes all the way from the Gemini loop to south, travels south and goes west till, would that be Railroad Springs, Busy, that area?
Presidio.
Presidio, okay. So, so yeah, so it captures a lot of areas and goes right through the central area of Flagstaff. And with that, it captures destinations, density. It's projected to have good ridership because of the existing, the way it is with the existing land use. And that's why it scores higher. If you see all the commuter routes, they do score low because density is a huge problem. And that's why we had recommended them as commuter routes. We also see there's a recommendation for a new express route, and that would be the 12th rank there, which starts at, it's an express route between MCC, Mall Connection Center and Downtown Connection Center. And so it doesn't touch a lot of local routes, and it's mainly traveling to the highway, and that's why it doesn't capture a lot of residents that could use the express route in between. It's more of a endpoint, more of a destination service than capturing ridership throughout the corridor. And that's why it ranks somewhere in between there. Followed by Route 5, Ponderosa Trails. We know these are some of the routes that have been scoring low, and even the Ponderosa Trail and airport area where density is pretty low. So I will stop here and see if anyone has any questions or comments.
Thank you, Daksha. Questions or comments for Daksha or Busy? Okay. I have, as I usually do, apparently, some questions.
Sure.
So, do you have a system score where we could compare one system to the next? Is that coming up?
Yes. So the
Okay.
next part, Andrew would talk about it more. If you
Excellent.
saw that in all the scenarios that I discussed, I didn't talk about microtransit zone scoring. And that's because a different set of evaluation applies to microtransit zones. They work differently than how the fixed routes work. And so in the next slide, we are comparing all the microtransit zones that Busy talked about in all the scenarios to see which area is more viable for microtransit service.
Excellent.
Yeah. And then we
Okay.
have combined fixed routes and microtransit, and we are trying to see, okay, which one is doing more well. Rhonda, if you could go to next
Well,
slide.
don't go yet.
Okay.
Don't go yet. Don't go yet. In this scenario, are we assuming park and ride with the commuter routes?
We actually don't have a park and ride necessarily, Dave. It really doesn't come into play in the model, et cetera.
Okay.
But
Fair enough. Thank you. And then this is almost a question for the committee members. Daksha, I noticed in your presentation, you kept referring back to changes that were made. And I'm wondering from a presentation perspective and sequence, if it's not better to go, here's the changes, here's the, and then here's this, here's the scenario and here's the changes, here's the scenario, here's the changes, here's the scenario, here's the changes. So they're kind of top of mind as we're looking at this scenario. And so I want to kind of put that to the advisory committee and see if they think that might make for a better flow in the presentation when it comes to be presented to the board. Anybody have thoughts along those lines? I guess it's a fine presentation the way it is. Just keep going.
Okay.
Okay, those are my comments at this point. So please continue.
Okay. Yeah, I think when Busy was going through the scenarios, she did talk about the changes, but then I wanted to refer back to the changes just to justify why the scores are the way they are. Gillian has a question.
I just want to comment. I think it's fine as it is. It's it's all, in my mind, it's hypothetical. And I think it's wonderful. I think you're also producing something hypothetical in a very realistic way. So it isn't just a dream, it becomes a possibility. So I'm just really enjoying the whole presentation. And I'm not sure, I can be picky too, and I think Dave's been picky here.
Okay. Thank you, Jillian. Please continue.
Okay. So Rhonda, maybe we can go to the next slide. And I will pass it on to Andrew to talk about the microtransit zone scoring.
Sure. So as Daksha mentioned, we looked at microtransit differently, and this is what we've done on other projects as well, because it's just not functioning the same as fixed route, and it operates so differently and not in sort of a linear way. So based on that, we are using something called Spare Realize tool. It's a simulation tool for microtransit, and it's actually, as Estella was presenting earlier, Spare Labs is the name of the company that's helping with the current Huntington Industrial Zone, and so they have a tool that helps simulate new zones. So we use that tool to do the evaluation for microtransit and focused in on these key criteria points, and that's the pool percentage. What that means is really shared rides. So what is the percentage of rides that you're getting within that zone on the microtransit that would be shared rides? And ultimately, the idea there is it's more efficient, less vehicles mile traveled, and it just shows that within that zone you could have a better use of the service and a higher rate of shared rides. We also looked at a productivity measure, passengers per hour. We didn't think ridership was necessarily the best metric to use for this, because this is not about high ridership areas. It's more about coverage and making sure that it's something that is productive, and the amount of service and labor that you're putting out there matches the market that it's serving. Median wait time, this simulation tool can actually come up with some estimates on how long people wait. This is a dynamic service, so it's not like the traditional demand response where people schedule a trip a day in advance. With microtransit, they schedule a trip and usually the bus will be there or minivan will be there, within 15, 20 minutes or so. Cost per trip, and then we did look at population. Now we're also putting into the model some other demographic layers to take a closer look at zero-car households and a couple others income levels to add to this. But we wanted to be able to show you this sort of initial preliminary scoring for microtransit. So we put in a number of different zones. Busy outlined those in scenario 2. That's really where a lot of the microtransit. And based on our initial simulation and modeling of this, we're seeing that some of the areas outside of the current service area for Mountain Line scored relatively high. Others, like Baderville and Belmont, really didn't pick up anything within that model. But Donny Park and even Kachina did okay within this, and Donny Park led the pack. And so the way we designed the Donny Park zone was it basically covered Donny Park, and then we also had a connection point at the mall, so it could tie in to other fixed route services within the Mountain Line system. And then I'll just sort of go through, give you an idea of what these zones are and understanding. So Ponderosa Trails, that's actually connected to the airport, that one. So it's basically Ponderosa Trails with connections to the airport. I think based on this pilot that's going on currently, be interesting to see some of those trend lines going to and from the airport. That'll probably be better information and data than what we're getting out of the simulation model. Route 66 South, that's basically the area of Presidio, Boulder Point, Sunnyside, Country Club, and Forest Street. This was interesting. This is another one that we tied to the mall, and so basically covering that area. Greenlaw, Huntington Industrial's right there in the middle. We combined the McMillan Mesa and Switzer Canyon together. And then Kachina would tie in also to a fixed route service as well. So it's not just circulating around Kachina, but it's circulating in Kachina and then having trips that tie into the Mountain Line system. And then you can see the rest. And basically the Route 66 North is Railroad Springs. I think interestingly, one of the more interesting ones was Thorpe Loop on this, and is that I actually thought this would score a little bit higher. And we connected this to the DCC, and it just wasn't picking up. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, but that scored relatively low. I think the main point here is that, you know, the ones that are really at the top, like those top 4 that you see there, they scored really well. So for example, Country Club in Donny Park, they have over 60% of the rides would be shared rides. They have over, you know, 4 to 6 passengers per hour for microtransit. That's actually really good. Oftentimes it's, you know, it's not a high productivity type service. Wait times tend to be between 15 and 20 minutes in these areas. And so anyways, that's the overview, and continue to update this and provide additional information to move forward with the evaluation.
And I would like to add one point to what Andrew was saying. So when we were delineating the zones, we wanted to make sure that the zones aren't too small, because if the zones are really small, then it does impact the pool percentage and cost per trip. And that's why probably you see Thorpe Loop is scoring low, because the zone is so small. What we were trying to capture is if Route 5 alignment is changed, which right now it goes through Thorpe Loop area. And if that is changed and we just have microtransit zone instead of the fixed route going all the way around Thorpe Loop, then but that zone is really small, and so that's why it scores low. So there needs to be, as Andrew mentioned, we will go through it again and see if it can be combined with anything else, and you know, then that would improve the overall cost per trip and passenger per hour score. So we can go on to the next slide then, if there aren't any questions. Okay, so we compared the scenarios here, and what we tried to do is see what are the scores for fixed routes and what are the score for microtransit zones. And when you see a score for microtransit zone, it's not all the microtransit zone for each scenario. It's the zones that we highlighted initially for each scenario. So for example, for scenario 1, we only have Thorpe Loop, University Heights, and Country Club, right? And scenario 2 had all the microtransit zones, and scenario 3 did not have any microtransit zone. And so we were trying in scenario 1, as I mentioned, it's a good combination of new routes to improve coverage, improvements to existing routes, and addition of microtransit zones to get that additional coverage in low density areas. Second, scenario 2 is mostly focused on microtransit, and so it scores a bit less in the fixed routes. And scenario 3, the reason why it is scoring less in fixed routes, because it has existing routes plus all this 7 to 8 new routes, and some of these routes, they go to low density areas, and so they end up scoring really low, and that impacts the overall scoring of that scenario. And so our intention is not like to choose one scenario just based on, oh, scenario 1 is scoring really well, so let's just take scenario 1. But our intention is to look at the individual improvements in each scenario and figure out which improvement is doing well overall. For example, when I look at a new hospital route, which is part of each scenario, we would also compare between the improvements, like which hospital route is doing better compared to the hospital route in another scenario. So we just wanted to still summarize the overall scoring and see how it looks. But the intention is not just to select a scenario which scores better. So any questions on this?
Committee, any questions? Okay. Please continue.
All right, I think that was the last slide, and then there are some next steps that Busy would touch base.
Yeah, thanks, Daksha. So following what we have today, we are looking to put this information into graphical materials to present to the public for our involvement phase 3. We are also going to be identifying costs for various scenarios, refining those scenarios and improvements, discussing implementation priorities, and then we will come back to the TAC and the board with recommended scenarios. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time today. I think we have maybe a minute if there's any pressing questions. I know we have a couple just progress reports and current events to go through. So any questions?
Any final questions? That's a lot of work being done. And I echo Jillian's thoughts earlier. Certainly feasible, and understanding the implication speech is going to be great. So thank you for the work you guys are doing. I think that takes us to our next item, which I believe is, as Busy said, as I scroll back up on the agenda, the progress reports. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Chair Wessel. So the progress reports, we won't present them individually unless somebody has a specific question. I'll run through the current events and then pause to see if you want us to go back to either of those progress reports. So a couple of current events I'd like to share with you. We were able to present to Flagstaff City Council on January 25th, our annual report. And this is really part of our ongoing efforts to educate members, our partner members, as well as the public on our programs, as well as the value of transit to the community. We have several recruitments that are in progress. Our operations department continues to recruit transit operators in an effort to provide us with some additional backup positions to help cover vacations and the numerous sick callouts that we are experiencing. We did just graduate 5 new team members out of our CDL training program, and we're looking to start our next class around the week of February 14th. We are interviewing for an operations manager. If you had not heard, Randy Biles, who was with Mountain Line for over 18 years, probably closer to the 19-year mark, did leave his position in late December to journey back to live closer to his parents and other family members. So we have interviews set up this week and early next week to try and refill that position. And then we're also interviewing for our management services director position. Lori Batiste did leave her position in early November. Josh Stone has been serving in the interim role to help us get through that period of time. And we're excited to get those interviews completed. Our planning team has initiated the Casper headquarters master plan project. The grant funded project will evaluate how we use our current facilities and look at how do we maximize the use of the space to increase storage and maintenance as planning and administrative staff look to leave this site and move to the Downtown Connection Center. We were asked to participate in the Federal Transit Administration Small Urban Transit Roundtable to talk about the transition to zero emission buses. It was an interesting conversation to hear about the challenges that we all face as small communities with small teams to make that transition, as we're being encouraged to do by FTA. We do have a House bill before the state of Arizona. I believe that we shared with you, Representative Blackman did drop that bill on our behalf. It is a $6 million one-time funding ask. Has been assigned to the Banking and Appropriations Committee for a hearing, although we don't yet have a date. And then additionally, Senator Rogers confirmed that she's willing to carry that same bill through the Senate side of that process. Briefly, we welcome a new HR technician, Sheldon Yazzie. He started part-time with us just recently. It's a new position for us, and we're very excited to have him here, and he's bringing lots of new ideas to our team. Also welcome to our new HR intern, Sophia Quick. Sophia is a student at Northern Arizona University and is participating in that internship program. So we're excited to have both of them here on our team. And then lastly, a couple of January anniversaries. We have several operators, David Slack, celebrating 1 year, Rachel Scala at 3 years, Melissa Williams 4 years, and Geraldine Lewis at 6 years. We have 2 anniversaries in our facilities division, Tim Brennan at 6 years and Robert Hilbers at 7 years. And then from our leadership team, Jim Wagner is celebrating 16 years, although I will admit it's a little deceptive because Jim was actually here when I started and was part of the Mountain Line launch in 2001. And he just took a brief break and came back. And then also Josh Stone is celebrating 3 years. And I won't skip because my team has asked me not to. I celebrated 20 years in January, in case you hadn't heard. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. And that's my brief summary of current events.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions for Heather? And I'll send my comments concerning Jim Wagner offline.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Is there anything else on the agenda that we need to cover?
That was the last item, sir.
Okay, so it looks like our next meeting is Thursday, March 3rd. And if there's no other questions or comments from the group, I'll thank staff for excellent presentations and adjourn.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Happy
everybody.
anniversary, Heather.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.